The moment my son Joey shut the door in my face, suitcase in my hand, I knew 15 years of silence were about to change the course of my entire life. I stood there on his front porch, the same porch where I once watched my grandchildren play with chalk, and realized my own flesh and blood had banned me from the family like I was a stranger. Little did they know, 15 years later they'd be standing on my porch, staring at a life I built without them. If you're watching this, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Because this is the story of how a widow like me went from being thrown out with nothing to owning a home they could only dream of. Before I share what I finally told Joey and Priscilla after all those years, hit subscribe so you don't miss how I stood my ground. And while you're here, download your free ebook titled Healthy Boundaries After 60. How to set strong boundaries, saying no with grace, protecting your peace, and strengthening relationship with your children by clicking the link in the pinned comment. My name is Chastity Kendrick, and I'm 78 years old. When you get to my age, you stop caring what people think, except when it's your own children who turn their backs. That's the kind of pain that cuts deep, the kind that makes you question your worth. And for a long time, I thought I'd never recover. But looking back, that day on Joey's porch was not the end. It was the start. It was the fall of 2008. My husband had just passed, and I had nowhere else to go. Joey and his wife Priscilla invited me to stay for a little while I sorted through bills and figured out what was next. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, and walked their 2 kids to the bus stop every morning. I thought I was helping, but Priscilla thought otherwise. She never liked having me there. She told Joey I was interfering, that I was confusing the kids by acting like I was in charge. Truth was, I was just being a grandmother. I reminded the children to say please and thank you. I tucked them in when their parents were busy. I thought I was showing love. She saw it as competition. The morning it happened, Joey wouldn't even look me in the eye. "Mom, this isn't working," he said flatly, while Priscilla stood behind him with her arms crossed. "You're too set in your ways. It's time you moved on." I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't have anything lined up yet." Priscilla shrugged like it was nothing. "That's not our problem." Then she said the words that would ring in my ears for years. "You need to understand you're not welcome here anymore. Not now. Not ever." I'll never forget the way Joey picked up my old brown suitcase, set it outside, and quietly said, "Come on, Mom. Don't make this harder." Harder for who? For them or for me? They didn't even let me hug the kids goodbye. Priscilla told me she didn't want me confusing them with false promises. She made sure they stayed upstairs while I left, crying into their pillows because they didn't understand why Grandma had to go. That was the last time I saw their faces for 15 years. I walked down that driveway with less than $900 in my purse, a small bag of clothes, and no plan. My husband and I had worked all our lives. I never thought I'd be the one homeless at 63, but that's what I was. Homeless. Banished. Erased. Joey didn't even wave from the door. The woman I raised him to be kind, respectful, and loyal was gone, replaced by someone who listened to his wife more than his own conscience. The shame burned hotter than the cold wind that morning. When I reached the street corner, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew if I did, I'd break down completely. Instead, I pulled that suitcase along cracked pavement, wondering how I had gone from raising a son as a single mother after my husband's accident to being treated like an unwanted guest in his home. For years, I had worked night shifts, ironed clothes, and taken in extra jobs to keep Joey fed and educated. And this was my thank you, a ban. 15 years of exile. That night, I checked in the cheapest motel I could find off the highway. $40 a night. Stains on the carpet. The smell of mildew in the air. I sat on that creaky bed and opened my purse to count what was left. $847. That was all. I felt small, disposable, like someone had taken scissors and cut me right out of the family picture. But here's the thing. Sometimes being cut out gives you space to stitch a new design. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the start of something I never saw coming. Joey and Priscilla thought they had shut the door for good. Instead, they lit a fire under me that never went out. 15 years later, when that same son and his wife showed up at my gate after reading about my new home in the newspaper, their eyes wide with surprise, I knew everything had come full circle. They thought they had buried me. What they didn't realize was that I was only planting seeds. That first night in the motel outside Tulsa, I sat on the bed with my suitcase propped against the wall and counted every dollar I had left. 847. I wrote the number down on a scrap of paper because I knew every single dollar mattered. The room smelled like bleach and smoke. The air conditioner rattled so loud I could barely think, but it was a roof over my head. That was more than I had that morning. The next day, I walked to the diner across the parking lot. I ordered coffee and a small breakfast, then paid with coins I dug out of my purse. I saw the waitress glance at the change in my hand and shake her head when she walked away. That stung. I had always been the one to tip well, to buy extras for the kids, to cover the little things nobody else thought about. Now, I was the woman other people pitied. Later that week, I went through the drive-thru at a fast food place. I counted quarters at the window, and I heard the worker whisper to the cashier, "She's short again." I wasn't short. I had the exact amount, but it made me feel small. I pulled the bag into my lap and drove back to the motel fighting tears. It wasn't the food I cared about. It was the way I suddenly felt invisible, like people saw me as another old woman who had outlived her usefulness. I knew I couldn't live like that for long. Every morning I walked 2 blocks to the public library. It was quiet, and more important, it was free. I signed up for a computer card so I could use the internet. I hadn't typed a resume in years, but I forced myself to learn the system. Job listings, classifieds, anything that could keep me from running out of money. The librarians started to recognize me. One of them, a kind man named Dennis, would nod and say, "Back again, Miss Kendrick?" I'd smile and pretend I wasn't desperate, but the truth was the library became the only place I felt like myself again. Most afternoons, I sat at a wooden table and wrote out plans on notebook paper. I listed jobs I had done in the past: grocery store clerk, office assistant, childcare. I had always worked, always done whatever was needed to keep the family afloat. But at my age, applications went unanswered. Nobody was eager to hire a 63-year-old woman with no recent work record. At night in the motel, I pulled out a small sewing kit I had carried for years. It was one of the only things I managed to pack when Joey threw me out. I started hemming my own pants, patching small holes in my blouses, keeping myself presentable for interviews. As I worked, I remembered the years I spent sewing to make ends meet when Joey was young. I used to fix neighbors' clothes for a few extra dollars. I had even repaired prom dresses and graduation gowns for local kids who couldn't afford new ones. I had pushed that memory aside, but with the needle in my hand again, it felt like a piece of me was waking up. One afternoon, as I sat at the library computer, I overheard a woman complaining that the zipper on her coat was broken and she couldn't afford to replace it. I surprised myself by saying, "I could fix that for you." She looked at me funny at first, then asked how much. I told her $5. She brought the coat back the next day, and I returned it with the zipper working. She smiled and handed me 10 instead of 5. That was the first bit of hope I'd had in weeks. Word spread in small ways. A man at the motel asked if I could shorten his work pants. A woman at the diner heard I could patch jeans. It wasn't steady, but it was something. Every time I earned a little money, I wrote it down in my notebook. $5, $10, 25 for a wedding dress repair that took me 3 evenings to finish. It added up. Still, life at the motel was humiliating. I tried to keep my head down, but people whispered. I caught 2 employees talking at the front desk. That older lady's been here almost 2 months now. Wonder what her story is. I wanted to shout that I wasn't a charity case, that I had worked hard all my life, that I wasn't finished, but I stayed quiet. I knew my dignity wouldn't come from arguing. It would come from building something new. By the end of those first 6 weeks, I had less than $300 left from my original savings. But I also had a small stack of receipts from sewing jobs. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was proof that people still needed what I could do. I sat on the bed one night, needle in my hand, and told myself, if I can sew one seam straight, I can sew my life back together. That became my motto. Every morning I still went to the library to look for work, but every night I leaned on the skill that had always been there. I didn't know where it would lead. I just knew I wasn't going to let Joey and Priscilla be the last chapter of my story. One afternoon, after another long morning at the library, I stopped by a dry cleaner near the bus stop. My blouse had a missing button, and I thought maybe they had a spare. The owner, a woman named Darlene, came to the counter. She was in her 50s, sharp voice, quick hands. When she handed me the button, she noticed I was carrying a small sewing kit. "You sew?" she asked. I nodded. Been doing it most of my life. Hemming, patching, whatever kept things together. She pointed to a stack of clothes behind her. "I pay a lady to do alterations, but she's always late. You want to try one?" I took home a pair of dress pants that night. The hem was torn and the waistband needed adjusting. I finished it in less than an hour and brought it back the next morning. Darlene looked it over, ran her fingers across the stitches, and whistled. "This is cleaner than my regular girl's work." She said, "You want some more?" That was the moment things shifted. I started doing small piles of alterations for her every week. She paid me cash, not much, but enough to stretch my motel budget. The real change came when her customers started asking who had fixed their clothes. She told them it was a lady named Chastity who works miracles with a needle. Soon, a woman showed up at the motel with her daughter's prom dress. "They told me you could help," she said. "The zipper was broken and the hem had ripped." I stayed up late sewing, hands aching, but when I saw the girl twirl in that dress a few days later, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong with it, something lit up inside me. People began calling me directly. A neighbor at the motel asked if I could take in her uniform. Another man wanted his jacket repaired. Each job reminded me that what others threw away still had value. And each time I handed back something fixed, I thought about myself. If clothes could be stitched back together, maybe I wasn't finished either. One evening, while working on a pile of shirts, that thought stopped me cold. For weeks, I had been telling myself I was broken, discarded. But looking at those garments spread out on the motel bed, I realized they weren't broken. They just needed someone willing to take the time to mend them. And maybe that was true for me too. I didn't need Joey and Priscilla's approval to feel useful. I had my own 2 hands, and they were still steady enough to create something people valued. The work grew. Word of mouth spread quicker than I expected. I started meeting customers in the library lobby to pick up and drop off clothes. I'd carry them back to the motel in a laundry bag, stitch late into the night, and deliver them a day or 2 later. People were shocked at how fast I worked and how sturdy my repairs were. I thought this coat was finished. One man said as he slid it back on, "You gave it another life." That comment stayed with me. Another life. That was exactly what I needed for myself. Soon I had more requests than I could manage from the motel room. I charged $5, sometimes $10, depending on the job. It wasn't much, but I could see a pattern forming. My notebook filled with names, dates, and amounts earned. A few dollars here and there turned into enough to cover groceries and even pay for a small storage unit where I kept fabric, spare zippers, and supplies people gave me. Darlene at the dry cleaner pushed me further. "You've got talent, Chastity," she said one afternoon as she handed me another bag of clothes. "Most folks patch holes. You make things look like they were never torn." That praise mattered. After being told I was a burden, it felt like a lifeline. It was around then that I had my first repeat customer who wasn't from the dry cleaner. A teacher named Carla brought me a stack of skirts and blouses. "I've already thrown these out twice," she said, "but someone told me you can fix anything." She was half joking, but when I handed her back every piece, neatly mended, she looked at me differently. "You really can." She slipped an extra 20 into my hand and whispered, "Don't sell yourself short." Those words sat with me for days. Don't sell yourself short. For years I had accepted scraps of love, of space, of time. Joey and Priscilla had made me feel like I was only good for babysitting and nothing else. But strangers were telling me I was worth paying, worth trusting. That kind of validation seeps in slowly, but when it does, it builds a backbone. By the end of that first year away from Joey's house, I was no longer counting out coins at diners. I still lived in the motel, but I wasn't drowning anymore. I was sewing my way forward, one job at a time. Every stitch was proof that being cast aside didn't mean the end. Sometimes it meant the start of a new pattern. And as I packed up my sewing kit one night after finishing another prom dress, I said to myself, if discarded clothes can be revived, then so can I. That was the seed that would grow into everything that came next. If that line gave you chills, don't just sit there. Subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs hope. And if you won't subscribe, at least admit in the comments why hearing stories of second chances makes you uncomfortable. By the end of that year, I had managed to save a few $100s from all the odd sewing jobs. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me wonder if I could finally step out of that motel and into something steadier. Carrying clothes back and forth in laundry bags was starting to wear me down. Customers trusted me, but I knew if I wanted to grow, I needed a place where people could actually find me. I walked the streets near the library one morning and saw a sign taped to the window of a laundromat, "Space for rent." It was just a small corner with enough room for a table and a sewing machine. The rent was $200 a month. My stomach turned at the thought. 200 was a big bite out of what I had, but I couldn't ignore the chance. That afternoon, I went back, asked for the owner, and signed a short-term lease. I moved my few supplies into that corner and told myself, this is my shop now. The first week, I sat behind the folding tables with a handwritten sign, "Alterations and repairs. Ask for Chastity." Some people walked by without stopping. A few gave me odd looks, like I didn't belong there. But then a man brought in a uniform shirt with a ripped sleeve. I patched it neatly and charged him $6. He left smiling. 2 days later, he sent 2 co-workers. That's how it started. Word spread in slow but steady ripples. People trusted the laundromat already, so they didn't mind handing me their clothes while they washed the rest. Soon I had a stack of jobs waiting for me each morning. Pants too long, skirts needing zippers, coats missing buttons. I stayed late, sometimes until the owner had to remind me to lock up. I didn't care. For the first time since Joey threw me out, I felt like I had a place in the world again. The difference wasn't just the money, though that mattered. It was the way people looked at me. Instead of pity, I saw relief and gratitude. They'd hand me something they thought was ruined, and I'd hand it back whole. That exchange gave me more confidence than anything else. Over time, I found myself developing a niche. Regular alterations kept me busy, but what really set me apart were the special jobs. Vintage clothes became one of them. Customers brought in dresses from the 60s and 70s that had been sitting in closets. They wanted them wearable again. Most tailors turned them away, saying it was too much trouble. But I enjoyed the challenge. Old seems delicate fabric. It made me think harder, and when I got it right, the customer's face lit up. Wedding gowns became another specialty. One bride-to-be came in nearly in tears. Her dress had ripped during her fitting, and the store wouldn't help. She asked me if there was anything I could do. I stayed up until midnight, carefully stitching, reinforcing, and pressing every fold until it looked perfect. When she picked it up, she hugged me so tight, I nearly cried with her. From then on, more brides found their way to my little corner. Word of mouth carried faster than any advertisement. Uniforms kept the steady income rolling. Police, firefighters, hospital staff, all of them needed clothes adjusted or repaired. They trusted me because I didn't cut corners. I pressed every hem, double-stitched weak spots, and treated each piece like it mattered. That reputation was my biggest asset. Within a year of opening that tiny corner, I had a notebook full of repeat customers. Some came every month. A teacher would bring me skirts. A coach needed patches sewn on team jackets. A nurse dropped off scrubs. Each person left satisfied, and each one told someone else. That was how the business grew. No ads, just people sharing their experiences. I'll be honest, I didn't make big money at first. Some weeks, I barely covered the rent, but there was a steady climb. At the end of 12 months, I looked at my ledger and realized I had doubled what I made the year before. That was proof enough that I was moving in the right direction. What made it sweeter was the feeling that I was rebuilding myself, not just clothes. Every time I fixed a torn gown or brought back an old jacket, I thought about how Joey and Priscilla had thrown me away. They said I was too set in my ways. But here I was creating a new way forward. The laundromat owner, a man named Carl, once joked, "Chastity, I think people come here just for you now. I ought to raise your rent." He laughed when he said it, but I could tell he was proud of what I'd built in that little space. I didn't have a big sign or a fancy shop, but I had something more powerful: trust. My corner became a place people knew they could bring what mattered to them and leave happy. And with every job, my confidence grew. Looking back, I see that little space as the turning point. The motel had been survival. The library had been searching. But the laundromat corner was building. It wasn't just about sewing anymore. It was about proving to myself and to anyone watching that discarded things and discarded people could find a second chance. After a year in that laundromat corner, I knew I had taken the business as far as I could in that space. Customers were lining up, dropping off more than I could keep up with. I had clothes stacked on folding tables and bags spilling into the aisles. Carl, the owner, was kind, but I could see he was getting tired of the clutter. One afternoon at the library, I saw a flyer pinned to the board: "Free small business workshop. Learn how to grow your idea." I almost walked past it. Me? A businesswoman? But something told me to take it. The class was held in the community room. There were maybe 15 people, most younger than me, but I sat in the back with a notebook. The speaker talked about bookkeeping, marketing, and the importance of separating personal money from business money. Half of it went over my head, but I wrote down every word. At the end of the session, a woman named Rosa Alvarez introduced herself. She was part of the Small Business Development Center. She asked what I did. I explained my corner in the laundromat and how I repaired clothes. She leaned in and said, "That's not a hobby. That's a business. You need to treat it like one." Her words stayed with me. For weeks, she met me at the library to help me organize my numbers. She showed me how to track income, how to list expenses, even how to plan for growth. She asked me if I'd ever thought of opening a storefront. I laughed at first. With what money? She smiled. That's why there are microloans. The application was long. Page after page of questions about revenue, projections, and business plans. More than once, I almost crumpled it up and gave up. But Rosa wouldn't let me. She sat with me for hours, guiding me through each section. Don't undersell yourself, she reminded me. Write down what you actually do. By the time I turned it in, my hands were shaking. I felt like I was signing up for something bigger than I had ever dared to dream. When the approval letter came, I cried. The bank granted me a $7,500 microloan. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to get a used industrial sewing machine, racks for clothes, a sign, and a few months' rent on a small storefront. I found one just a block away from the laundromat. It wasn't fancy. 2 windows, a narrow back room, and enough space for a counter. But when I stood inside, key in hand, I thought, this is mine. I named it Second Thread Studio. The name came to me one night while sewing. I thought about how clothes, once torn, could be given a second life with the right stitch. People were the same. I was the same. Nothing is worthless if you know how to mend it. That became my philosophy, not just for business, but for how I lived. That's not just a motto, it's a life lesson. If you agree, subscribe right now. And if you don't, tell me why in the comments. Don't just watch silently. The first months were slow. Some days only 1 or 2 customers walked through the door. I spent those quiet hours organizing fabric, polishing the counter, and practicing new techniques. I kept a smile ready, even when the register barely held enough to cover the light bill. Rosa checked in often, reminding me that growth takes time. Trust your work, she said. Word of mouth will do the rest. She was right. By the end of that first year, the studio had a steady rhythm. Brides came for gown repairs. Workers dropped off uniforms. Older women brought dresses that hadn't fit in years and left grinning when they did. People started calling me not just a seamstress, but a lifesaver. One woman told me, I was going to throw this jacket away, but you made it look brand new. I told her, that's what I do. I don't give up on things. The loan was paid off in 18 months. I framed the last payment slip and hung it in the back room. Every time I looked at it, I remembered those nights in the motel counting coins. The difference was almost too much to take in, but I held on to it. I never wanted to forget where I had come from. With the studio running, I started hiring help on weekends. A young mother named Tasha came in to learn hemming. A retired man named Bill, who had worked in upholstery, offered to help with heavier projects. I paid them fair wages, and they added life to the shop. Customers liked seeing more faces. It made the place feel less like a one-woman show and more like a true business. Every stitch was another reminder that I had taken what Joey and Priscilla meant for harm and turned it into purpose. They thought they had ended my story, but all they did was give me the push to start a new one. Second Thread Studio wasn't just a shop. It was proof that people, like clothes, could be restored. I closed the register one night, counted the bills, and smiled. I was no longer just surviving. I was building. And the best part, I wasn't doing it for Joey or Priscilla. I was doing it for myself. Running Second Thread Studio kept me busy from sunup to sundown, but I never stopped thinking about how to take it further. I didn't want to go back to scraping by. I wanted stability, and I wanted to know the work I was doing could last. That chance came one afternoon when a woman from the local hospital walked through the door. Her name was Denise, and she managed uniforms for the hospital staff. She set a large bag on the counter and said, "I heard you do good work. Can you fix these scrubs? The stitching comes apart too fast, and replacing them every few months is killing our budget." I asked how many uniforms she had. She pointed to the bag. "That's just one department. We have hundreds." I worked on those scrubs for 2 days straight, reinforced the seams, patched tears, and pressed them clean. When I called Denise to pick them up, she looked them over carefully. "This is better than new," she said. 2 weeks later, she called again and asked if I could take on the entire hospital. That contract changed everything. I hired 2 part-time workers just to keep up. The money wasn't huge at first, but it was steady, and steady was what I needed. For the first time since Joey had put me out, I felt real security. I wasn't just depending on walk-ins anymore. I had guaranteed work. Word spread from there. A principal from the high school came in, saying he needed band uniforms repaired before a competition. Then a middle school asked me to fix cheerleading outfits. A community theater group dropped off costumes that were falling apart. I took on every job. I worked evenings, weekends, whenever I had to. The more I delivered, the more calls came in. I realized I couldn't keep doing it alone. I started asking around and found younger women who wanted part-time work but couldn't get hired anywhere else. A single mom named Kayla came in first. She had been turned down by retail stores because of her schedule. I showed her how to hem pants and patch tears. Then I brought in an older woman named Martha who'd been sewing at home but never thought of it as more than a hobby. She picked things up quickly. Training them gave me a new kind of pride. I wasn't just fixing clothes anymore. I was giving jobs to people who needed a break, the same way I had once needed one. They were nervous at first, but I told them the same thing I told myself every night in the motel. If you can sew one seam straight, you can rebuild your life. The studio changed with their energy. It wasn't quiet anymore. Machines hummed side by side. Laughter filled the air. Customers liked seeing that. They said it felt like more than a shop. It felt like a place where people were working together for something bigger. By the 3rd year of running Second Thread Studio, the numbers spoke for themselves. I sat down with my ledger and realized I had crossed into 6 figures, over $100,000 in revenue. I stared at the total for a long time, remembering the days I couldn't buy a sandwich without counting coins. That milestone hit me harder than I expected. I had gone from being told I was useless to providing jobs for others, from being thrown out with a suitcase to signing contracts with hospitals, schools, and theaters. I no longer felt like someone just surviving. I was building something that mattered, something that couldn't be taken away by one cruel decision from Joey or Priscilla. Customers began to see me as more than a seamstress. They came to me with ideas. How about making graduation robes, custom aprons, or company uniforms? Some of those ideas didn't work out, but I tried them anyway. Each attempt taught me something. Every success gave me more courage. One evening, as I locked up, I saw Kayla and Martha leaving together, laughing about something from the day. They waved at me, and I thought about how different their lives looked now compared to when they first walked in. Kayla told me once that the paycheck from the studio helped her keep her apartment. Martha said the job gave her confidence after years of feeling invisible. I realized then that the breakthrough wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. I sat at the counter that night, lights off except for one lamp, and whispered to myself, they tried to throw me away. Now I'm the one giving people a chance. The hospital uniforms kept coming, the schools returned every year, and the theater made me their permanent partner. The work piled up, but I wasn't scared anymore. With every stitch, I proved what I had believed deep down since the motel. Nothing is worthless if you know how to mend it. 10 years after I first opened Second Thread Studio, I sat down with my accountant and looked at the numbers. The business had gone from scraping by to bringing in steady contracts and steady growth. I had paid off every loan, saved more than I ever thought possible, and was finally in a position I never imagined. I could invest. I had never been one to dream about wealth. My focus had always been survival, then stability. But once you climb out of survival, you start to see possibilities. I wanted something solid, something that would last beyond me. Property was the answer. Land doesn't disappear. A home doesn't vanish. It becomes part of your story, something no one can take away. I started small. I bought a duplex on the east side of Tulsa and rented it out. The tenant's rent covered the mortgage. After a year, I used the profit to buy another small house. I kept running my business, kept repairing uniforms, costumes, and wedding gowns, but I also became a landlord. It was hard work, dealing with repairs, late-night calls, and paperwork, but it taught me something new. Security wasn't just about money in the bank. It was about assets that built value even while I slept. The more I learned, the bolder I became. I sold one of the smaller houses and rolled the money into something larger. My mentor Rosa smiled when I told her, "You're thinking like a businesswoman now," she said. "Don't stop." Then, in my 11th year of running the studio, I heard about a property outside Oklahoma City, an old estate sitting on several acres. The house hadn't been lived in for years. The roof leaked, the floors needed replacing, and the gardens had been left to weeds. The asking price was high for the condition, but still below market because of how neglected it was. I drove out to see it one Saturday morning. The first time I walked through those doors, I knew it wasn't perfect, but it was mine the moment I stepped inside. The wide hallways, the high ceilings, the empty rooms waiting for life again, it all spoke to me. Just like the clothes I had been mending for years, this place wasn't ruined. It just needed care. Some of my friends thought I was out of my mind. "Why not buy something move-in ready?" they asked, but I shook my head. That house reminded me of myself. Written off, forgotten, but still standing, waiting for a second chance. I put in the offer. Within weeks, it was accepted. The renovation took months. I hired local workers, many of them people who had struggled to find jobs, just like I once had. We fixed the roof, replaced the wiring, sanded down the floors, and brought the gardens back piece by piece. I didn't rush it. Every decision felt like stitching a new seam, making sure it would hold for years to come. When I finally moved in, I walked from room to room with a mix of disbelief and pride. I had gone from sleeping on a motel bed with coins in my purse to unlocking the doors of an estate most people in the county only saw from a distance. It wasn't about showing off. It was about standing in a space that represented every step I had taken since the day Joey and Priscilla told me I was no longer welcome in their home. Neighbors stopped by, curious about the new owner. They told me people had driven past that estate for years, shaking their heads, saying it would never be restored. Now it was alive again, and I was the one who had brought it back. Some even asked if I would host tours or community events. I decided to open the gardens a few times a year for local charities. It felt right to share what I had built, especially with those who needed hope. Walking the property one evening, I thought about the words Priscilla had spoken all those years ago. "You're too set in your ways." She had said it as if I was finished, like an old coat tossed in the trash. But here I was, walking acres of land I owned, running a business that employed people, living a life they couldn't even imagine. They once said I'd probably end up in a nursing home, but instead I ended up in one of the most admired homes in the county. If that doesn't deserve a like and subscribe, what does? And if you still won't, at least explain in the comments why lifting women up bothers you. Owning that estate was more than financial wisdom. It was personal triumph. Every brick, every beam, every acre was proof that being cast out doesn't mean you're finished. Sometimes it means you're finally free to build a life on your own terms. I'd sit in the evenings on the porch, watching the sun dip low, and whisper to myself, "This is mine. I earned this." And deep down, I knew it was only the beginning of the story they never thought I'd get to tell. It had been 15 years since Joey and Priscilla banned me from their lives. 15 years since I last saw my grandchildren's faces. By then, the estate outside Oklahoma City was not just my home, but a symbol of every hour I'd worked, every stitch I'd sewn, and every risk I'd taken. I thought I had left that painful chapter of my life behind. Then the doorbell rang. I glanced at the screen of my video doorbell, and my chest tightened. There they were. Joey, older now, gray at the edges, shifting nervously. Priscilla, standing straight with that same look of confidence she wore years ago, though it seemed thinner this time. And behind them, two nearly grown kids. My grandchildren. They looked taller, older, but I knew those faces. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, watching them through the screen, remembering the day they told me to leave with nothing but a suitcase. My heart raced, but I kept my breathing steady. After a few minutes, I unlocked the door and stepped into the frame. "Well," I said, "I never thought I'd see the three of you on my porch again." Joey forced a smile. "Mom, hi. We read about you in the paper, about the estate, the business. We wanted to come congratulate you." Priscilla chimed in, her voice sugar-coated. "Yes, Chastity, we thought it was time to reconnect. Family should be together, don't you think?" I didn't move aside to invite them in. That's a surprising thing to hear after 15 years of silence. The kids stood awkwardly behind them, eyes darting between us. The boy had his hands shoved in his pockets. The girl clutched her phone tightly. They looked unsure, like they had been dragged into this visit without much choice. Joey cleared his throat. "We know things ended badly. We've thought about it a lot, and we regret how it all happened." He glanced at Priscilla, then back at me. We were young, stressed. We didn't handle things the right way. I folded my arms. The right way would have been not throwing your mother out with nowhere to go. But go on. Why are you really here? Their smiles faltered. That's when Priscilla stepped forward. "The truth is, things have been hard. Joey's hours were cut. The mortgage is behind. College applications for the kids are coming up. And, well, we thought maybe now that you have all this space, we could stay here. Just temporarily, until things settle." There it was. The real reason. Not family, not regret. Need. I stayed calm, letting the silence stretch until it grew heavy. "You want to move in here?" I asked slowly. Joey nodded quickly. "Only for a while, Mom. Just until we get back on our feet. It would mean so much to the kids to spend time with you." The girl finally spoke. "Grandma, is it true you used to read to us every night? I don't really remember." Her voice cracked a little, and something inside me softened. None of this was her fault. "Yes," I said gently. "I did. I never wanted to stop." But then I looked back at Joey and Priscilla. "You made sure I couldn't. You cut me out. And now you show up because you think I have room to spare." Priscilla's smile disappeared. "That's not fair. We're trying to fix things now." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're trying to fix your money problems. That's not the same thing." Joey tried again. "We've missed you, Mom. The kids have missed you." I couldn't help but laugh, not out of joy, but disbelief. "You told me 15 years ago I wasn't welcome. You kept my grandchildren from me. You didn't check if I was alive or dead. And now, suddenly you've missed me?" The boy looked at his father. "Dad, is that true? You didn't let her see us." Joey stammered, but Priscilla cut in sharply. "We did what we thought was best at the time. The past is the past." I shook my head. "No, the past is the reason we're standing here right now. And it doesn't vanish just because you want it to." The silence that followed was thick. I could see the kids trying to piece together what they had just heard. I kept my eyes steady on Joey and Priscilla, refusing to let them slip past with half-truths. Finally, I said, "You want to live here, in this house I built from nothing after you threw me out of yours? That's what you're asking?" Priscilla nodded, her tone clipped. "Yes, it makes sense. There's more than enough room." I leaned against the doorframe and let out a long breath. "It may make sense to you, but to me, it sounds like desperation dressed up as family." Their faces fell, but I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this moment for 15 years, and I wasn't going to waste it pretending I didn't know why they were really there. I stood there in the doorway, watching Joey and Priscilla squirm, while the kids shifted uncomfortably. They wanted me to forget 15 years of silence and suddenly play the role of the mother and grandmother they had cast aside. I knew exactly what needed to be said. I turned my eyes to the children first. "Do you know why I haven't been in your lives?" I asked. They looked at each other, then back at me. The boy spoke up. "Dad always said you moved away because you didn't want to be around anymore." My chest tightened. "That isn't true," I said plainly. 15 years ago, when your grandfather passed, I stayed with your parents for a short while. I cooked for you, read to you, and helped however I could. Then one morning, your mom and dad told me I wasn't welcome. They carried my suitcase to the porch and told me to leave. I had no money, no place to go, and they cut me off completely." Their eyes widened. The girl whispered, "Is that true?" She turned toward her parents, but they stayed silent. "Yes," I continued. "For 15 years, I was banned from family events. I wasn't allowed to see you, not because I didn't want to, but because your parents decided I was a burden." The boy looked angry. "So you didn't abandon us?" "No," I said, my voice firm. "I never abandoned you. I was pushed out." The kids were quiet, but their faces told me they understood more than their parents wanted them to. I turned back to Joey and Priscilla. "You asked if you could move in here. The answer is no. This home represents every step I've taken since you threw me out. I built this life on my own. I will not hand it over to the same people who told me I wasn't good enough to live under their roof." Joey opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. "Don't argue. You made your choice 15 years ago. Choices have consequences. You don't get to erase them just because you've fallen on hard times." Priscilla's expression hardened. "So, you're just going to punish us forever?" I shook my head. "No, this isn't punishment. This is accountability. You chose to ban me from your lives. Now, I choose to keep my life separate from yours. That's fair." Then I softened my voice and turned back to the kids. "But you, my grandchildren, you are always welcome here. This is your grandmother's house, too. You don't need permission from anyone to come through this door. If you want to visit, if you want to talk, I'll be here. 15 years were stolen from us, but I won't let another day be taken." Tears filled the girl's eyes. She whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." Priscilla tried to protest. "You can't just split us like that." I looked her straight in the eye. "Watch me." The silence that followed was heavy. Joey dropped his gaze to the floor, ashamed. Priscilla clenched her jaw, but even she knew the conversation was over. They had come expecting to manipulate me with the word family, but I had learned the hard way that family without respect means nothing. After a long pause, I said, "You may leave now. And when you go, remember this. I will not be used. If you want a relationship with me, you'll need to rebuild trust from the ground up. That starts with honesty, with your children, and with yourselves. Until then, don't come here asking for a place to live. This house isn't your safety net. It's the result of every stitch, every risk, every lonely night I endured when you turned your back." Joey nodded slightly, grabbed his wife's hand, and started walking toward the car. The kids hesitated, then looked at me. I hugged them both quickly and whispered, "My door is open for you. Don't forget that." When they finally drove off, I stood alone in the entryway of my estate. I thought I'd feel angry, but I didn't. What I felt was peace. The truth had been spoken, the boundaries had been set, and for the first time in 15 years, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. This wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been letting them move in and then humiliating them later. No, this was justice. Justice was building a life so strong that the people who once discarded me now had to face what they lost. Justice was opening my door to the grandchildren, but refusing to let history repeat itself with their parents. Justice was living on my terms, in my own home, without apology. As I closed the door, I thought back to that motel room with the broken air conditioner and the coins I once counted at a diner. I smiled and whispered to myself, "Look how far you've come, Chastity." And now, I want to ask you, the one listening to my story, have you ever been discarded, only to come back stronger? What did you learn about your own worth? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and send it to someone who needs to hear it. Lastly, download your free ebook titled Healthy Boundaries After 60. How to set strong boundaries, saying no with grace, protecting your peace, and strengthening relationship with your children by clicking the link in the pinned comment.